Hello everyone, welcome to this video tutorial. I am Chidumen Namde. Here we are going to learn two-way data binding using the model function. Now the model function came new in Angular version 17.3. So you need to upgrade to 17.3 before you can use the model function. And this model function is based on signals. So you need to learn and know what Angular signals are before you can be able to proceed in this video tutorial. So if you haven't learned about the Angular signals, you can go to my video on it. I've talked so much about the Angular basic signals, the signal inputs, effects, and all that. So go back and refresh your memory or learn about the Angular signals before you can continue with this video, because the model function is based on signals. Now let's begin. So the model function, like I've said before, is used for two-way data binding in Angular component. So the parent component and the child component data bind to input, and both the child component can change the input and it will reflect in the parent component, and the parent component can change that data bound input and it will reflect in the child component. Now let's see here, we have a book component and a book list component. So this book list component is the parent component, while the book component is the child component, because the book list component renders the book component. Now we in the book component we have a class field book that is of book type and represents a single book. In this case, it represents the Avengers here. Now it has a change title method that changes the book by adding just this exclamation here, and now in the template you see it just renders the title and the synopsis of the book, and then a button change title to change the title of the book or novel. So you see the child component is this, child component is why the parent component is this. So now let's go to the parent component. You see it renders the book component, and then it also has the book property class field that holds the book vendor, and also has a change synopsis method that changes the synopsis of this single book here. So now let's see how we can create an input in this book component using the model function, and then we can two-way data bind on the input from this book list component, so that whenever we change the book component from this book list component, it will reflect on the book component, and also when we change from this book component, it will reflect on this book list component. Now let's start. To start, we need to import the model function from the angular/com module. So we import it. Now we want to do the two-way data binding in this book variable or class field. So what we're going to do, we will call the model function, and then in this case we are passing an initial value, which is this book. So with this we have done, we have created an input in this book component. We have created an input in this book component. Now when we call this model like this and then assign it to this class field, then it turned this book to a signal value. Now it turned it to a signal value, and then to get the value of this signal we need to call it as a function, because signals are getter functions. Now you can see the return value a model signal, and also so now this model signal is a subclass of the signal, so it's a writable signal. So since this is a writable signal, we can either set a value on it and update it, and it will reflect on our template. Now we have an error here, because to access the value here, we need to access the value in this signal, we need to call it as a function. So we need to call here as a function, call here as a function. So whenever we call it as a function, it returns the value set in it, which in this case is this, or a type of a book, or the current value embedded in it. So for now, let me comment out this so as not to confuse ourselves. So coming to the template, we need to call it as a function like we have already said, then call it as a function, because like I said before, the model function returns a signal, and to access the value of a signal you need to call it as a function, because the function is a getter function. So very good. Let's save this our component. Let's save it. Okay, now for now it works. We still have our Avengers and synopsis rendered here. Now let's see how we can now data bind, two-way data bind this model input from the book list component. Now what we are going to do is that we'll come here, we'll use the banana in a box symbol. The banana in a box symbol is just like this. You first the square brackets, then inside the square bracket you put the parentheses, then inside it you enter the name of the input we want to two-way data bind. In this case it is the book, because this is the name of the class field in the book company we want to data bind to. So we put it like this, then followed by an equal sign, empty string, and inside this empty string is where we add our expression. So in this case we want to data bind this value book inside this book list component, or let me just say, okay, just for clarity purposes, let me just call this a book list book. Yeah, for clarity's sake, so we don't confuse the name with the name we are data binding to the book component. So let me just call it that. I know it doesn't sound right, but let's just call it for now so you can understand what we are doing. So we want, this is a class field in this book list component, so we want to data bind it to this book component. Now we'll just copy it and paste it, then we'll save. Okay, the property book does not exist on type book list component. We have an error. It's from here, so we need to just change it. We need to change it and then we'll save. So very good, we have it here. Now we have data bind to data bind this book input from the book component to this book list component and also to the book component. Now this book list component will send in this book object to the book component via this book input. Then the book component will grab it here as a signal and then display it. So you see, in this case, this is not a signal at all. It's a non-signal value. It is a non-signal value, so we don't need to call it as a signal. So it's just an object. We just need to use the dot operator to access the title and the synopsis. But in this book component, the input here is a signal. So Angular will pass this from this book list component and set it as the value of this book signal. So that's why we now call it like this. Now looking at our DOM, you see we are no longer seeing Avengers here previous. We are now seeing the vendor because it's the data being passed from the book list component. Now let us change. If we change the value of this signal, it will affect that in the parent component. Now let's see how it's done. We'll come here. Since this book is a signal, let's use the update method on it to update the value. So let's just say this dot book dot update, then we'll pass in our function, we'll receive the current book there, then call it a book. Then what we're going to do here, let's just change the book title. Let's just change the book title to, let's just call it a title, and then we'll just return the book. So we are returning the book. So this book returned will be the next value of this book or value. So this here is the current value in this book signal. So that's what we are calling our, let's just say current book, then we are returning it. So when we click on this button, change title, it will call this method. Then this change title method will call this method inside this book signal, and it will update the value of this book to have the title as a title. Now when this happens, it will communicate this data to the parent component, which is this book list component, and this book list book value title will change to a title, so that we will see a title here, no longer the vendor. Now let's try it. Let's make sure our DOM is loaded. So when I click on this change title will change, and then these two on the parent will change. Now let's go. Let's click on it. So you see the child changed and also the parent changed. This is because we two-way data bound the property book list book in the book list component using this banana in a box symbol to the book input in the book component. so that whatever you do in the book component, any change you do to this book class field, it will reflect in the parent component. So that's what happens. And also, if we change the value of this book list component, it will propagate to the book component via this. So let me now uncomment this out and now say something like so. We're just changing the synopsis to add an exclamation mark at the end of it. So when we click on this change synopsis here, it will change the title to this, and we'll get the change both in our book list component and also in our book component. Now let's go. If I click on this synopsis, we have an exclamation mark here and also here. Now let's go. So you see we have it here and we also have it here. So this is in a basic syntax how the model function works and how it does it two-way data binding. Very simple to use, no extra art decorator or using the ng model. Very easy to use, and also it is signal based. Now let's look at in our book list component. See, we have a basic object here. Let's change it to a signal and see how it can affect the book component. Simple. We'll just do something like this. We'll call the signal function and import it from the Angular slash core. So everything resides as the Angular slash core. So now this becomes a signal. You see, it becomes a writable signal. So change synopsis. Since it's a signal, we need to remember it's now a function. We need to access the value by calling it as a function. So we'll change this here. Then we'll come down here and we're no longer doing this like this because it's no longer an object, it's a signal. So what we're going to do is very good. We are now going to use the update method in the signal class and update it. So when we do something like this, it still will propagate the changes to the book component, and the book component also will propagate its changes to the book list component. So you see, we're no longer using an object but a signal, and yet the two-way data bind will work. We will not change anything here, and also it will work. Now let's go. Let's change title here. So now the title will become a title, and also it will propagate to this parent. Now let's go. So you see, and also when we change the synopsis will change to a new synopsis, and it will propagate the same change to the book component. So these two will change, these two will change. So you see it, a new synopsis, a new synopsis. So what happens here is that when this is loaded, Angular got the value of this signal and passed it down to the book component using this. Then the book component got the value and passed it as a value to this book signal. That's why we're able now to get it in the DOM like this. So that's how we can use signal also to propagate a two-way data bound changes from the parent component to the child component using this banana in a box symbol. Now, this model, as we have seen, is just like a combination of the at input decorator and the output decorator, because we already know that the at input decorator is used for input of data from a parent component to a child component, whereas the output is used to propagate data or communicate data from the child component to the parent component. So this model embodies the two. So that's why it is able to get input from the parent component and also propagate change to the parent component. So let's change this to at input and also to at output to see how we can also use at input and at output to do the same thing this model does. So the first thing we need to do is to remove this model. Remove this model. Fine. Now this, we have converted this back to an object. So we remove this invocation. Now let me just comment this out for now. Now we need to decorate this with the at input decorator. Now let me import it. So we have decorated this with the at input. So now this book is now an input property of this book component. But you see, we are using banana in a box symbol, not just the symbol, not just the square brackets, because the square bracket is used for data input. Well, but we are having this parenthesis again. So this doesn't, this just will have only input but no output. Now, to make a complete two-way data bind from this book component using the at input and at output, we need to create another class field which will have the same name. That class field will be the output. It will have the same name as at the input, but suffixed with the name change to read. So we'll write book and then add change. So this tells Angular that this is the output of this, and we are data binding, we are two-way data binding this input to the parent component. And now we must decorate this book change with the at output decorator. And then, as we already know in our output video, and any class field decorated with the at output decorator must be of a type of event emitter. So we initialize event emitter here, say event emitter, then it must be of a book. So with this, we have created a two-way data input in our book component. So this is the same thing as what our input does. But you see how the model simplified everything for us. We don't need to add this extra class field just to in our component just to make a two-way data bind to our parent component. So with this, our two-way data bind to our parent component works. So here we'll come here and change and update this our book. We no longer use this update instead because the book is an object. So we'll just come and say this dot book. Let's just spread this inside and just change the title. Just change the title. Here we are not yet done because we only made the change in our book component. So this will only reflect in our book component. It will not propagate to the parent component. So we need to call this book change. We need to use this book change and then call the emit method in it, and then pass the book that we have already changed to read so that it will propagate this change to the parent component. So with this, it will propagate the change to the parent component and also to our book component, so that the parent component, we don't need to touch anything here. We'll get this, we'll get the emission. That's the magic the Angular does. They get the emission and then update this accordingly so that the template will render to show whatever that we have here. So let's go. Now, if we click on this change title, this event data will change to a title and also the parent will change to a title. Now let's go. So you see, both of them changed because we changed the book component and then we emitted it via this book change. Without this change suffixed in the book, the change to the parent would have occurred. So now let me just remove E here and save. It won't work because the property, it will throw an error. So we have half the two-way data binding. So we need to, because you see the property and event halves of the two-way data binding are not bound to the same target. So we need to add E, change suffixed to the name of the input before the two-way data binding can work. And if we do not emit this, it will not propagate to the parent. We only have the change in our child component. So now when we click on this, we only have the change in our child, no propagation or change to the parent. So let me remove this and save. So when we click on this, you see the both changes affect the child component and also the parent component. So we see we did not touch this. This is the symbol to make the two-way data bind. Now let's look at how we can respond or monitor model changes in our parent component. Now we can monitor the changes done to this input in a parent component in our two-way data bound input. Now, to do that, we can set an event also in this component to monitor the book change. Just this is how we just do our output event. If you watched our output, our at output decorator video that I did, so this is how it is done with the parentheses. Then let's just add a method. Let's call a method here, then passing the data coming in from the child component. So it is held here in this dollar event. So we'll come and create this book change method here. Okay, so let me remove this. This is book of a book type. Then remove this and then console log. So let's just console log. Now this method book change will be run whenever the child component, which is this book component, emits a data. So whenever it does this, we will get it here. So you see that we are two data bound to the book input of the book component, which is our child component, and also being able to respond to changes to this book list component. So this is how we respond to the changes in our two-way data bound class field, which is this book list component. So whenever the child component changes this, now we will have a console log here because this book change event will be emitted and it will trigger this our book change method. Now let's clear our console. When we click on this change title, we will see a log here. So now let's click on it. So you see it's changed both components title in the book, and also we have our log here. So you can see it changed them, and then we have a log here. So this is how we respond to model changes. Now we are using a signal here. Fine. If we remove this will no longer work. We will have an error. So we need to pass a value here. And once we pass a value here, we have broken the two-way data bound automatically done for us using the banana in a box. So now this two-way data bind output we will manually add it. So like this, if we change the title in our child component, it will not reflect in our parent component because we have broken that two-way data bind input. By doing this, we are not telling Angular that we will do the two-way data binding ourselves. So now if we change this title, it will only change the parent. We will still get the change here, but it will not change. It will only change it in the child, but not in the parent. So what we are going to do is that since we are having the response in this our book change method, what we are going to do is that we'll come here and simply complete the two-way data binding because this book is coming from the child. So we just have to update our book list signal value signal to the current book coming in. So now when we save and click on this, it will affect both components. So you see that's how it's done. So this we did is just the manual data binding, but if we don't want this, we just can simply put our banana in a box. Then when we are done with that, we will have to remove this for signal and then change. Then when we change, it will reflect. So if this is not a signal, let me remove this. If just a plain data, it's not a signal. So it's not a signal. Now let me update. Let me first close out this and comment out this. So this is just a pure data, not a signal. So, and when we remove this, also we have broken the automatic two-way data binding here. So we will no longer call this. So we're no longer calling it because it is not a signal to send in the value. We are calling it because we need to actually send a signal, but with this banana in a box for signals, we don't need to call it. Angular detects a signal and sends the value for us. So when we make this to be a non-signal, we need to send the actual value when we just have to data bind the input just like this. So with this, we can just simply comment this out, because since this is no longer a signal, we don't need this again. We just need to update the object like this. Synopsis like this. So let me spread in the book list, then remove this. Then now to complete it, we just say this dot book list. Does the book coming in and say we have okay callable here, so we need to remove this also and save, so that when we change the title here, it reflects on both of them. Now, as we have seen, this class field will become the name of the both the input property of this class of this book component. So that's why the two-way binding is being done on the book name. So the name of the class field will now be the DOM property name or the input property DOM name, in which the parent component will data bind to this. But Angular made it possible for us to also set our custom name. This is called alias. So alias is the custom name of the class field marked with this model function. So now to set a public name of our own that we want the parent component to data bind to this book class field, we will have to use the alias property. Now to do that, we need to pass a model options object to the model function. Then here we'll set the alias property, and then the value becomes the name that the parent component will connect to this class field. So by doing this, we have set the public name of this model of this book class field to book input, no longer book. So the parent component will have to do data bind to this book component using the name book input, no longer the book class field name. So we'll come here and change it to book input, and you see everything works. See, everything works very well. Now also let's look at required. If we by default model is optional, so if we remove this, our application will still run. But if we want to make it a must that the parent component rendering this our book component must pass in a two-way data bind model of book or the book input, because okay, for now let's just remove this alias. We are done with it. So to be make it possible or that this class field, this model input is required, we need to call the required method inside this model options or this model object. So to do that, we just come here, add the dot property, then we'll call the required. So this makes this input to be required. Now, since we have called this, it takes no initial value. So we have to remove the only thing it takes is a model options. Now it doesn't take an initial value of the signal here, because the parent component must send in a value of this. So there is no way here will be undefined. So that's why it does not take any initial value. And the next thing it takes here, the only thing it takes here is just the model options object. So now when we save, we have an so you see we don't have any book here, so that's why it renders nothing here. Now the book component must now send in an input via the book property. So we now come here and say book list book, copy this, put here. Now before we now see this, then also in this required we can set alias You can set alias. You set it to book input. So with this, we have an error. So where input from, so we have an alias. So we'll remove this and add input, and it will resolve it. Very good. So you see how we're able to make our model to have an alias, a public name, and also to make it required. So this is a basic way, and the more less verbose and has a clean syntax way to make or add two-way data binding from our child component to our parent component. And you see how it works very well with a non-signal value and also with a signal value. Remember, with a signal value, we need to call it here if this is a signal value, but if not, we just need to pass it just by doing this here, and then assigning model to our class field. We have made this to be two-way data bound to the property of this, such that if we make an update to this object, it will reflect and also change the value in this signal. And also when we change the object in this book, the property or anything in this book, it will propagate the same change to the parent component and make the change here. So this is easy two-way data binding, very easy to use than the traditional way by using the ng model or the combination of both the at input decorator and the at output decorator. So thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this video lesson. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you have any question or you have any confusion regarding what we did in this video, please pen it down in the comment section. I will address them. And also, if you have any feature or anything at all concerning Angular you want me to address in a video, also pen it down in the comment section. I will surely do a video on it. Thank you so much, and see you in the next video. Bye.